we are here because I feel gaslit. This video serves no further purpose except I honestly feel gaslit, and that is bothering me. So I set up on very furious V5 reading with my cat, by the way. Hello. Wearing a collar so that he can't bite himself to death. Can you please stop that? Because Outstar has said that when it comes to kindred relationships, this does not work. And I was like, I am absolutely certain that that is not the case. And just from the popular media that they have so far released with other gaming products, I was like, I am absolutely certain this is not the case. For example, in the Night Road, if you decide to be intimate with the prince, it is described as a very passionate sexual encounter where both of you kind of hurriedly strip naked and bite each other, which is described fairly sexually. The turning in Shadows of New York was also described as a very sexual thing, so I was like, there is no way that I am currently experiencing some sort of weird event where I am remembering everything one way and literally everyone else is like, no, you're wrong. That is not how things went. This can't be right. So I went on a reading spree. So this video just aims to answer whether or not feeding from kindred would be sexual or not. Let's start from the tweets. Murta, please check out V5 core book again. There are vast differences in how the kiss is experienced by mortals and kindred, hence why lingering kiss doesn't work addictively on kindred. In lingering kiss, it does not even specify that it does anything to kindred because it's specifically kindred on mortal ability. There are rules for tag bites, P213, which are not pleasant for anyone, humans included. There are rules on feeding on vampires, P213, which never say it's pleasant for them, and rules for Diablerie, which specify you need to mobilize the target, because again, it's not pleasant. There are even rules for kindred intimacy, specifically P310, which never state that there's pleasure in anything else than drinking blood. A pleasure of addict getting their dose. Vampires by large cannot feel sexual pleasure in general. Bloodhunt is strictly based on V5 and was developed simultaneously, so if you're more familiar with previous splats or an official wiki, have another rule questions on how exactly Diablerie of feeding works, the books got you. I got you. I had this problem before with the Sabbat book. If you want to tell me something, please tell me this in no uncertain terms. And when I go back to the core book and I reread the core book, I just got myself really confused because there are no uncertain terms used. Like, everything is just... It's hard to put this into a sentence because, once again, I'm not an English speaker. What I'm saying is V5 book is mishmash, and if this is what you try to imply with V5 book, this is not how it comes off to me as a reader, and I do not see why, if this was your intention, you had to word things in a way that I cannot understand. Why can't you just make a simple sentence of, this feels nice, this hurts, this feels nice for the biter, not so much for the person being bitten? Because once again, I am seeing sexual pleasure and you're not seeing sexual pleasure, and now I am very confused because... Let's just go and have a read, okay? Slaking hunger. The bite of a vampire can seem downright euphoric to the victim. Vampire fangs produce a supernatural intoxicating effect while opening up a blood vessel. Assuming the vampire takes the time to hit the vein or artery correctly and licks the wound closed afterward, the victim may only remember the encounter as a drug trip, an interlude of weird, rough sex. Or just delirious fog. Just that specifically likens it to sex. of drunken intimacy. Even a closed wound and happy hallucination for the victim might still leave behind an air embolism, to say nothing of long-term anemia. Just from reading perspective, that sentence was like completely not needed, because now that sounds as here are the rules on how our world works. By the way, if the storyteller wants to screw you over and make you lose humanity, you did everything absolutely 100% perfectly, but guess what? They got air embolism, died, and now you have humanity loss. That's the only reason why you would include that statement. So once again, V5 core book, why do you phrase it like that? Why can't you just speak in regular, easy to understand terms? As a general rule, attempting to preserve the victim's life, health, or blissed out screen memory, all of which of course also preserve the masquerade, takes longer than simply ripping open an artery and jerking down the red stuff. On the other hand, victim who fights back slows things down and endangers the masquerade. A vampire can drain and kill helpless, otherwise unresisting human in roughly 5 turns. So you have likened this to sex, and then said extra bits that, hey, this is presuming that you take your time, but then you didn't say what happens if you don't take your time. You were just like, yeah, if they fight back, it slows down rather than speeds up. Confusion to the maximum. Let's go to kindred intimacy, because this is vampires biting vampires, okay? Sooner or later, all kindred are denied certain parts of the pleasures of the flesh. To some, that is the end of that, while others realize that the play of blood offers experiences that are so much more interesting than mere copulation. Intimacy does, however, carry its own set of dangers, as vampires lost in the throes of passion are prone to sip straight from the source, thereby exposing themselves to the dreaded blood bond. Unscrupulous vampires callously use this fact to their own advantage, using the powers of seduction to inflame their lovers to the point where they cannot resist this urge. Conscientious vampires use all sorts of methods and protections to edge closer to the front without actually going there, denying themselves the true pleasure of the kiss. The true pleasure of the kiss, previously on Immortal you likened it to sexual pleasure. I'm still in the sexual realm. I don't know how you're not. I am. This could be cutting and dripping, letting the blood flow for a while along the body, hopefully long enough to cool off its bonding properties. Others imbibe only small drops, cutting and only licking, no swallowing. What? If it's on your tongue, you would swallow it eventually unless you wash it off. What? And so on. Provided that both parties are doing their best to play safe, avoiding stepping closer to the blood bond requires a simple composure plus insight test versus difficulty based on the level of the precautions taken. 2 for raincoat level, 5 for unprotected. Needless to say, for many vampires, pleasure to inversely proportional to protection. Manipulating someone into crossing the line is a contest of charisma or manipulation, performance versus composure plus insight. Trying to do it without the other party realizing the intention reduces the dice pool by 2. Taking a direct sip tests composure plus subterfuge versus composure plus insight. Many vampires find that this type of intimacy with people who are already bound to someone else lacks certain something and avoid it if they can. If one party is bound to the other, it's usually significantly more entertaining for the bound party, and many avoid intimacy with the bonded to them for this reason unless offering is a treat. If both parties are bloodbound to each other, the practice is usually frowned upon and sometimes creates a source of great jealousy. With multiple parties involved, the complications quickly escalate. This states absolutely nothing outside of it is pleasurable. It is more pleasurable if you are subjecting somebody else to it, especially if they're not blood bonded to absolutely anyone else. including yourself, because if they're blood bonded to you, they would enjoy it too much, therefore you don't like it. This whole thing just reads its own bit of problematic if I was to translate it properly. So it is fun to trick another party into sex, especially if they haven't had sex with anyone else before. It is a lot less fun if the other party is super into you, because they're gonna be super into sex, and that you do not like. Going for like the previous bit to this one that considers it a pleasure, I can't move out of the sexual realm. Like, you literally likened it to it previously. There's nothing in here to unliken it. How am I supposed to read this and not... I mean, am I wrong for putting 2 and 2 together? Am I not supposed to put 2 and 2 together? If you don't want me to put 2 and 2 together, why did you liken it to sex previously, and why didn't you leave any other indicators here except it's really nice and kindred do the kiss on each other? I mean... I'm so confused. Surely I can still read words. This is why I feel so gaslit. If you don't wanna intend something to be taken a certain way, what's so hard about wording it in a way that's not uncertain in any way, shape, or form? Why do you have to be like this? Do you hate people from not English countries? Do you dislike people that will take what they read really literally? Like, I mean, I am not reading some sort of obscure occult text here. Why are you trying to hide what apparently you mean under layers and layers and layers of word that give me a completely different intent? I don't understand. I don't understand. Section on feeding from other vampires. As vampires who feeds on another vampire slakes 1 point of their hunger for each point of increased hunger they inflict on the donor, willing or unwilling. Feeding from a vampire of at least 2 levels of blood potency higher than the drinker slakes 2 points of hunger for each point of hunger gained by the donor. Conversely, feeding from vampire of at least 2 levels of blood potency less than the drinker slakes only 1 point of hunger for each 2 points of hunger inflicted on the donor. Feeding directly from another vampire also risks a blood bond, see page 233. Does not tell me literally about how this feels. Just saying, just because something feels nice doesn't mean that you can't be an unwilling participant to it. If I was to avoid the R word, let's say that I am force feeding you cake. Cake might be tasting. You might really not want cake right now. That is still a form of torture. You know, just because something is increasingly nice doesn't mean that you can't be an unwilling participant to it. To give the easiest example is I had surgeries in my life. Under one, I got minimum painkillers because my nurses sold off painkillers, but under the second, I got morphine. And what I remember the most, what freaked me the most out, is that I couldn't tell reality and dreams apart. I was like full-on hallucinating people walking through walls and shit, and because I couldn't identify what was real and what wasn't, that was such an incredibly scary experience. And you can't say that, I mean, there are people addicted to morphine. You can't say that morphine, like, specifically does not feel nice. But to me, it was such a torturous experience. It was, and I asked to be off it as soon as possible, and it still, like, took some time, but, like, I was off it in, like, a week. I was off it really, really fast. And I was never on it ever again. And if I even had medical emergency, I would probably avoid like really strong drug painkillers at all costs, because that experience was so scary to me. So just the fact that you're like willing or unwilling, that says absolutely nothing to me. It really does. Bite attacks. Vampires can use their fangs as weapons during a brawl-based attack. To attempt a bite attack, the player must declare their intention to bite before rolling their dice and remove 2 dice from their pool. Bite attacks are easier to defend against and harder to target on exposed flesh. Regardless of the number of successes rolled, vampire fangs do 2 points of damage with a win on the brawl roll. Fangs deal aggravated health damage to mortals and vampires. On turns following a successful bite attack, the vampire can feed from the target. At this point, the vampire suffers no penalty to their brawl pool. A successful bite is hard to dislodge. Feeding does 1 point of aggravated health damage to mortals per turn, as well as slake 1 hunger for the feeder. Against a vampire target, a feeding attack increases the target's hunger by 1 turn instead of dealing additional damage. Does not tell me anything about it being like unpleasant past the bite bit. The bite bit, yeah, sure, you can use any sharp object as a weapon, and even as the bite is described in other World of Darkness works, like it's painful, but then euphoria washes in. It's normally how they explain it. So yeah, there were people that in their history got embraced through torture by what is called slow feeding, which I would assume is you would specifically try not to drink from the person too much. You would just bite them, maybe take a sip, then close them, then bite again, because it's the bite that's the painful bit. It also says absolutely nothing on how the person that's feeding from the victim feels about the whole thing, because the only thing that we know about it is that the shit feels good, and that's been likened to sexual intercourse previously in the book. You don't go, oh, you know, when used aggressively, specifically, it is very painful. You no longer describe it. Diablerie, an act reviled by most vampires, claiming any form of civility or fearing righteous destruction. Diablerie involves drinking another vampire dry, ingesting not only their blood but their very essence. Vampires with a religious bent speak of consuming the victim's very soul, and those who can sense auras can clearly see stains afflicting the perpetrator. Committing diablerie. To begin with, the would-be diablerist must generally immobilize their target. Voluntary sacrifice to diablerie is rare but not unknown in the twisted operation that is jihad. Heavy chains, a stake, torpor, or many partners holding the victim down have all worked in the past. Now, remember that in this game, it's just you and your hand. Like, one hand. And such a vile act, if we take every single game produced under World of Darkness tag as canon, which apparently it would be, because apparently they interact very heavily with the writer team as working on this, it would mean that somebody during the whole Vienna Fall managed to consume like 20 or 30 worth of vampires a night. That in itself just seems to go completely against everything that this game is about, but you know, never mind that. some people said, oh, the heavy constriction of the person would make it seem like it is painful, but not necessarily, because as I said, in this game, you're holding that person down with just one arm. And in general, on the discords that I was talking about, if a vampire gets too down on blood, they would frenzy. So your issue there might be that your target will frenzy and bite you back unless you do that. It doesn't necessarily denote pain. It doesn't necessarily denote discomfort. You haven't disclosed that. Night Road deals with eating another vampire, and that segment was disclosed fairly briefly. But if I remember, she woke up, she was bitten as like her last memory, and she was overcome by that slumping feeling of being unable to do anything about it. She wasn't being held down. And then if you go back to, I think it was Coteries of New York, the whole interaction between Hope and the other Malkavian, Hope was nearly eaten by the other Malkavian, and the other Malkavian was on top of them, fighting them, but not really holding them down in any other manner. And apparently Hope took a while to exit that trance after you dragged them off. So once again, now we have 3 games where excessive holding down is not required, and excessive holding down in itself does not denote feelings to me. Then the Diablerist must drink the victim's blood, a feeding similar to most others, except given the viscosity of vitae, it usually requires an entire scene to accomplish fully. Partners may help consume the victim, but only one drinker can attempt to gain the target's power and full Diablerie. Having incapacitated and drained the target, the would-be Diablerist can try to commit the final blasphemy, the true Diablerie, incorporating the target's very nature and power into themselves. The Diablerist needs to win a number of strength plus resolve tests equal to the victim's blood potency. The attacker can make one such roll per turn. If even one fails, the victim's animating spark dies unconsumed, thwarting true Diablerie. In either case, the body of the victim swiftly decays in final death. Effects of Diablerie. Once the Diablerie is complete, the Diablerist must assert control over the alien blood to their system or risk falling prey to the victim's spirit. The process revolves as follows. Diablerist loses 1 point of humanity. They must enroll a contest of humanity plus their own blood potency versus the victim's resolve plus blood potency. Every success gives the Diablerist 5 experience points to immediately spend on increasing blood potency. Yada yada yada. This once again does not address how the fuck that feels, and if you're only addressing is that, well, it's sexual, how am I supposed to take it as anything? But it doesn't help that you have this segment. Sexual violence in games. Let's not mince words here. Vampires since John Polidori's story The Vampire was published in 1819 have been used as a metaphor for human predation. Also as a metaphor for sex. It was literally a metaphor for sex. You couldn't, like, put in sex inside your work, so you used a vampire because you could simulate the same sexual feelings without it making so obscene that your work gets thrown out of the publisher's office. It's also why a lot of queer people kind of caught on to it, because you could technically have queer relationships inside vampire books without making them illegal, just overly sexual. Like, that's... I'm sorry, that's the whole point. They seduce, beguile, coerce, dominate, and sometimes outright force humans to perform their will. After all, they are apex predators and consider it their right. Vampires who embrace this perspective ignore or outright laugh at consent. Consent in this case can be non-sexual, but the nature of the kiss and the vampire's human predator carries with them an aura of sex. Polydori's original vampire was sexual predator who drank the blood of virgins on their wedding nights. While your Vampire the Masquerade game could strive to avoid sexual content at all costs, it's important to be aware of the potential for sexual violence as a theme. You outright state that it's based on a sexual concept and that your whole game is sexual. And then you go, it has nothing to do with this. It has nothing to do with this. I'm just saying that it's kind of disturbing to have this as a mechanic in a battle royale when you can have not had this as a mechanic in battle royale, considering that it's avoiding answering the questions of what the mechanic is and how often it would be normally utilized in a setting, which is, spoiler, not very often. You definitely wouldn't have somebody consuming 20 vampires a night. Like, I mean, do you wanna roll against whether or not you keep your soul 20 times? Not to mention the time involvement, not to mention all of these themes. It's fine in a tabletop RPG setting. It's even fine as a single player game because you're not playing against another player, but I feel like somebody hasn't thought things through. And then when they got brought up, they're like, no, that's totally not what our book says. Just look at the book itself, you know, that is definitely not what the book says. And then I go and I look at what the book says, and the book literally says what I think it says. Mine's some sort of Twilight Zone. Is it because I'm not natively English? I am so confused, and if I am this confused, my literal question is, why can't you just very clearly say what you mean? Why is literally the only descriptor of how this feels is it feels sexual, and then later on you never describe how it feels again, and then you tell me, no, it has nothing to do with sexual feelings. You're interpreting it wrong when your whole book has giant ass page warning about this very specific thing. I am just so confused. So yes, is the bite between kindred sexual and V5? It is. Nothing in the book tells me that it isn't, so it is. And the only mentions of the kiss in any way, shape, or form are sexual, or then the feelings that they produce just don't get mentioned again. So I refer to the first point where they're mentioned, in which case it is sexual. I scored pretty well on my English test in high school. I was literally not prepared for gaslit situations like 10 years later. Why is it just this franchise as well? Like, why can literally all other franchises just say very clearly what they want you to understand, and then this one just says, no, we haven't said that? Why does it have to be so? Why can't you just... I mean, if you don't want something to say something, just don't say something. Language, why is this difficult? Well, I hope that this was a deep dive enough into the whole problem, and I can just unload it off my head. I don't know if I'm gonna play Blood Hunt. In one way I want to, because I know it's gonna be a very, very short-lived game. So for the first like 2 weeks that it's still gonna be alive, I would like to have had tried it. I mean, I feel like I missed out by never trying Nosgoth, which might have been a better version of what they're trying to make, especially considering that it wasn't very specifically a battle royale and it used their own personal world, which always is a lot more fun and a lot less confusing when you don't have a 500-page manual to go through. But at the same time, the fact that they're using this as a mechanic and that they're throwing this around so willy-nilly, and they were very happy about influencers trying to pronounce it. It all rubs me. It just has like this layer of creeper factor that I just cannot take off, and I have a very big question as to why was that necessary? But, you know, that's just me. So thank you for watching.